for being here. Thank you for being on time.
I don't get thanked for that very often, so I'm very happy to have it be.
We said we'd start at midnight, and it's only 12:20.
That is so true.
That is so on time in our
Yes,
world.
it is. Definitely is.
So, Maggie, the backdrop to this debate has been all this drama around whether Donald Trump would participate. He did not participate. Can you briefly, based on the reporting you have done, explain why he chose not to show up?
So basically, Michael, from his perspective and his aide's perspective, why would he debate? That was their question. Trump has literally said that himself repeatedly, and they have made that point for many, many weeks now, going back to the spring.
What do they mean? Why not debate?
Because it was not in his interests as the frontrunner by a wide margin in the Republican primary to be on stage with people who are polling so much lower, in some cases really in low single digits. In their minds, it could only hurt him. It could take the shine off of him. It could allow someone else to shine, to have a moment at his expense. And on top of that, he has this long-running feud with the network that hosted the debate, Fox News, who he complains bitterly has treated him poorly, despite the fact that he got a number of solicitations from the network's hosts on air encouraging him to show up. Privately, two network executives went and met with him at dinner with him at his club in Bedminster. The Republican National Committee Chairwoman McDaniel also made a pilgrimage there. None of it worked, and so despite all of these solicitations, he said no, and instead, he decided to do a counter-programming competing event with a former Fox News host, Tucker Carlson.
Right, just to stick the knife in, it seems. Trump's not only not going to do the Fox News primetime debate, he's going to do an interview with a fired former Fox star, Tucker Carlson.
Exactly, and right off the bat in that interview with Tucker Carlson, Trump said, why would I go to a place where I'm just going to get harassed all night long?
And it feels like Trump's absence created a real dilemma for everyone who ultimately did decide to participate in the debate. And the dilemma was, should they focus their attention on Trump and attack him, even though he's not there, given just how far ahead he is in the polls, or should they focus their fire on each other, those in the room, and therefore perhaps improve their own standing in the poll, since, with the exception of Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, they're all so far apart?
That was the question, and the answer came really fast once the debate started.
Tonight, the race for the White House takes flight. Welcome to the first debate of the 2024 presidential campaign.
No one, neither the candidates nor the moderators, wanted to talk about Trump.
They are here to lay out their vision for America.
And so instead, the moderators tried right out of the gate steering the conversation toward issues.
More than 65% of Americans say the country is headed in the wrong direction.
And they all ended up using it as a moment to give an opening statement, although moderators had asked them not to do that. And we heard from 8 candidates on the stage.
So first, let me just address a question that is on everybody's mind at home tonight. Who the heck is this skinny guy with a funny last name, and what the heck is he doing in the middle of this debate stage?
We heard from entrepreneur and first-time candidate Vivek Ramaswamy.
Our country is in decline.
Ron DeSantis.
This decline is not inevitable, it's a choice. Now, I was elected as a conservative Republican in a blue state.
Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey.
Well, I don't care about polls. What I care about the fact is that no one is telling the American people the truth.
Nikki Haley, who is the governor of South Carolina.
So our Republicans did this to us too.
And it doesn't take long for them to all start going after each other.
You have Ron DeSantis, you've got Tim Scott, you've got Mike Pence. They all voted to raise the debt.
Vice President Mike Pence went after Vivek Ramaswamy.
Now is not the time for on-the-job training. We don't need to bring in a rookie. We don't need to bring in people without experience.
Vivek Ramaswamy attacked back at Mike Pence.
We're going to bring in...
I just want to finish responding to Mike. I just want to respond to Mike for 1 second because he invoked me back. Listen, now that everybody's gotten their memorized, pre-prepared slogans out of the way, we can actually have a real discussion now. The reality and the fact of the matter is...
Is that one of yours?
Not really, Mike, actually. We're just going to have some fun tonight.
And then Chris Christie went after Vivek Ramaswamy.
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, "What's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here?" was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
saying that he was invoking a pretty similar line to something that President Obama once said.
Give me a hot just so you can hear
Right. Explain that exactly what's going on here. We had assumed that in the absence of Trump, that the Republicans on this stage were quite likely to go after the number 2 in the polls, which is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. But instead, a number of them are going after Vivek Ramaswamy, this, as you said, political newcomer who's kind of unknown to a lot of the national audience. Why is that happening?
So there are a few reasons, Michael. One is because they're polling beneath him, and he is gaining on Ron DeSantis in a number of these polls. And because he's rising in the polls, while DeSantis has been losing steam, he's going to be a natural target. And he also represents something very specific in the Republican field, which is he's a far-right upstart, a younger generation. He's the most closely aligned with Trump. And candidly, he was something of a Trump stand-in on that stage.
So you could attack Ramaswamy, and in that sense, you're kind of attacking Trump?
Basically, yeah. I mean, essentially, Ramaswamy is offering the most full-throated defense of Donald Trump on that stage, even more than the person who served with Donald Trump, Mike Pence. And going after Trump in absentia worked better when it took on a physical form, and that was Ramaswamy.
Right, and in the next series of exchanges in this debate, it felt like Ramaswamy was both dominant as a figure in that room and extremely far to the right, as you suggested he was.
That's right. And so when they started talking about issues like climate, it was clear that Ramaswamy is just much, much, much further right than some of the other candidates. So, for example, on that issue, DeSantis was asked about it and didn't really answer the question.
As somebody that's handled disasters in Florida, you got to be activated. You got to be there. You got to be present. You got to be helping people who are doing this. And here's the deal.
So is that a yes or is that a yes?
He gave this sort of wishy-washy answer, whereas Vivek Ramaswamy was quite clear.
The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change.
I remember thinking by this point, Maggie, that Ramaswamy's answers are lucid and they are firm. DeSantis, a little more muddled, and that this debate is not really playing out the way we thought it might in terms of who was rising to the surface, standing out, and emerging as the debate's kind of protagonist.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy had a dominant night. He just did. And DeSantis had much less of a memorable one. He was less interested in standing out. He seemed as if he was basically just trying to survive. And Vivek Ramaswamy was trying to create memorable moments.
Right. Soon enough, we're at the end of the first half of the debate. And everyone has successfully steered clear of Trump. You know, the moderators are asking big, smart questions about important issues. Everyone's behaving as if this were a conventional Republican primary, a pre-Trump Republican primary, but it's not. He's a candidate. He wasn't on stage. He's in the race, and this primary will be about Trump, and yet no one's talking about Trump. He's conspicuously absent from it.
Right. It was almost like the moderators and the candidates were acting as if the Trump administration and the crazy events at the end never happened, and that this campaign really is actually focused on issues like climate change, as opposed to reflecting on one man. And it's really slightly untethered to the reality of what this campaign has been about so far. And it did feel like, okay, so when is what happened in 2020 and on January 6, 2021, when is this going to come up? But it becomes clear that in the second half of the debate, this is going to come up.
Right now, you are looking live at Fulton County Jail, where former President Donald Trump will be processed tomorrow. So next, the candidates will have an opportunity to talk about the coming trials of Donald Trump.
We'll be right back.
But we have a lot to get to in this second hour of this GOP primary debate. Policy discussions the Americans want to hear you all on. China, Ukraine, immigration, education. But we are going to take a brief moment and talk about the elephant not in the room.
President Trump has been indicted in 4 different states on 91 counts. He will be processed.
So eventually, the debate does, in fact, turn to Donald Trump and to the events of 2020 and even to January 6th.
Yes, thanks to the moderators.
Would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
Who raised the fact that Trump has been indicted several times and could be convicted criminally before the general election. And they ask everyone to raise their hands and say if they will still be behind him if he's convicted.
Right, and it felt like the opposite of everyone raising their hands at the same time or keeping them down. It was this kind of strange, reluctant, mushy thing.
It was like watching the wave at a ballpark, and so some hands went
Are
up,
drunk.
and right. Some hands went up, some stayed down. DeSantis, in a clip that Trump's team posted pretty quickly on Twitter, waited and looked at one half of the stage to see what everyone else
where the wave was.
Right, where was everyone else, and then raised his hand.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be clear, Governor Christie, you were kind of late to the game there, but you raised your hand?
No, I'm doing this. Look.
And Christie did like a half hand raise, half wave. It was hard to know what it was, and I don't think the moderators really understood what it was either.
Right, so they asked him about it.
Look, I'm doing this.
And
not
I know
this.
you didn't.
Whoa, no. Come. What's the look? Look, here's
Christie finally uses that moment to get his whack in at Trump, which is what everyone had expected he would do, and it mostly landed.
Here's the bottom line. Someone's got to stop normalizing this conduct. Okay? Now.
Right, this is an attack we expected because Christie, from the moment he announced his candidacy, said, I'm going to be the Republican who's willing to say the tough, difficult things about Donald Trump and the charges against him and what happened on January 6th.
That's right, and he had not done that throughout the debate up until that point, and he finally took that moment to do it.
Now, whether or not you believe that the criminal charges are right or wrong, the conduct is beneath the office of President of the United States.
But it didn't land that hard. He was booed pretty loudly by some in the audience for it.
It doesn't change the truth.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you raised your hand supporting.
No, I'd like to get in and respond. Let's just speak the truth, okay?
And then Ramaswamy had his moment, and he used it to praise Trump and attack Christie.
President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century. It's a fact. And Chris Christie, honest to God, your claim that Donald Trump is motivated by vengeance and grievance would be a lot more credible if your entire campaign were not based on vengeance and grievance against one man.
I'm sorry, 30 seconds covered.
You make me laugh because
Goes
you
both ways,
sit here in an answer. You sit here in an answer.
And once again, Ramaswamy shows himself to be a pretty skilled performer. And
Right, taking on Chris Christie on a debate stage, Christie's known as a slayer of candidates. And yet, in exchanges like this, Ramaswamy, it does seem, is getting a little bit of the best of him.
that's right. And it got so raucous between them that the audience kept booing and the moderators had to step in.
The more time we spend doing this, the less time they can talk about issues you want to talk about. So let's just get through this section. Governor Christie.
But they kept going at it, and Christie ultimately attacked Ramaswamy for his lack of experience.
I know a lot better than you do. You've never done it like you've never done anything to try to advance the interests of this government except to put yourself forward as a candidate tonight. And here's the thing.
Right, it got quite heated. And then, of course, Pence, who is at the center of all of that drama around January 6th and the end of the Trump presidency, finally gets his say about what happened on January 6th.
Right, and so Pence ended up talking about what happened that day, January 6th, 2021, amid this pressure campaign from Donald Trump, and how he got to the point of saying no.
But the American people deserve to know that the president asked me in his request that I reject or return votes unilaterally, power that no vice president in American history had ever exercised or taken. He asked me to put him over the Constitution. And I chose the Constitution, and I always will. I had no
Vice
right to
President Pence.
overturn the election.
It seems worth noting that Mike Pence might be polling in the single digits as he enters this debate, but he gets a tremendous amount of time and space in this debate and is assertive in a way that I don't think a lot of us who think of him in his vice presidency, which has often been defined by a kind of compliance and solicitousness, expected him to be what he was on this debate stage.
Pence really came out swinging in this debate. He had something to say, and he said it. And we got to see that several times. And so the others on stage were asked about Pence's actions to rebuff Trump and how he went ahead and certified the 2020 election. And he got praise from many on the stage.
Including DeSantis.
Including DeSantis and including Christie and Nikki Haley. They all said that Pence did his job that day.
Right.
Everyone said it except Vivek Ramaswamy.
Well, Mike, why don't you say this? Join me in making a commitment that on day one you would pardon Donald Trump. I'm the only candidate on the stage who had the courage to actually say it. That is how we move our nation forward.
Instead, Ramaswamy challenges Pence to agree to pardon Donald Trump if he's elected on day one.
And of course, Pence refuses to commit to that.
Correct.
Now we are moving on to other issues. The U.S. has committed nearly $77 billion in aid to the Ukraine war.
Then the moderators turn to foreign policy, they turn to Ukraine, U.S. support for it, and this dynamic we have been talking about, where Vivek Ramaswamy is very firm and very clear, and Pence is very assertive, and DeSantis is kind of fading, is very much on display again.
Is there anyone on stage who would not support the increase of more funding to Ukraine?
Yeah, DeSantis gets asked to articulate his position on support for Ukraine.
But you're saying you would not too, Governor DeSantis?
I will have Europe pull their weight. Right now, they're not doing it.
Right. Will the U.S. keep sending billions of dollars to Ukraine?
Yes, and he doesn't quite say whether he would or wouldn't.
Our support should be contingent on them doing it, and I would have support.
And then he tries to change the subject.
I'm not going to send troops to Ukraine, but I am going to send them to our southern border. When these drug pushers are bringing...
But then Ramaswamy, by contrast, gave a very clear answer.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine?
I would not. And I think that this is disastrous.
No more U.S. funding to Ukraine.
Right.
Ukraine is not a priority for the United States of America.
And this leads everyone to pile on Ramaswamy.
Anybody that thinks that we can't solve the problems here in the United States and be the leader of the free world has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth.
That is incorrect.
We can do both, Vivek.
Pence gives his position and attacks Ramaswamy again. Haley does the same.
Under your watch, you will make America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what?
It shows.
And the pattern where Ramaswamy is just a clear target, and again taking positions that align pretty cleanly with Donald Trump's, continues.
So Maggie, I'm really curious what you make of the fact that DeSantis is operating in the way that he did in this debate, not being as unambiguous as Ramaswamy, but perhaps more importantly, shying from the kinds of exchanges and conflicts that would have gotten him more attention. Because of course in these debates, if you get attacked, you get more time to respond, you get more minutes of the debate. Was that just DeSantis trying to stay above the fray? Was that strategic, or is this just a reflection of his disposition and manner as a candidate, or what?
You could see him at some points trying to be an alpha, which is part of his whole political persona, and using lines from his stump speech, but a bunch of them just landed with a thud. That said, his goal was clearly not to have the kind of viral moment that would be bad and would be what people would remember him for. So he sort of faded into the background, particularly later on as the debate went on. But I think that he preferred that to having a really bad moment. It was an unremarkable performance, but that probably was better than the alternative.
Around this point,
Thank you to all the candidates on the stage tonight.
the debate comes to an end,
Thank you, everybody. We will see you on the campaign trail from debates to...
and I want to talk about whose candidacy in your mind might have changed the most because of this debate, because of the way it unfolded, And ultimately, where this debate leaves this primary, in which Donald Trump looms so large.
There were two people who had standout performances, and one was Ramaswamy. His star definitely rose. He left the debate in a better position than he went into it, which is generally what candidates want.
Right, and which might lead to a rise in fundraising and attention, perhaps even polling. Who knows how long that lasts, but this was that kind of moment.
It's only a help to him as we head into the months before Iowa. The other person who had a standout night was Mike Pence. He was surprising. He was a guy who has been struggling in the polls and who is not known as a strong presence in the Trump administration, but he showed that he was a good debater and something of an adult in the room. Nikki Haley had a decent night, but she was delivering a general election message in a primary. I don't know how much that helps her.
Meaning her positions were ultimately just too far to the left of the Republican primary electorate.
Yes, and delivering a message that this Republican primary electorate isn't that interested in. Chris Christie will continue on because he has an audience for what he's saying, but most of the rest of the candidates are going to struggle in the coming months.
Well, what does it mean that the two people who had a really good night had the night they had? Because it would seem like it might end up just complicating the state of this Republican field in which there's such a vast gap between Trump and everybody else. And I want to talk through that.
This debate did very little to clarify anything, Michael, especially because the two people who had standout performances represent, in one case, Mike Pence's, the historic version of conservatism, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who's trying to represent Trumpism and the future of the party.
Right. And so what does it mean if, let's say, both of them benefit from this moment?
It means the party is still figuring out what it might be in a post-Trump world.
But it's not a post-Trump world.
There is no post-Trump world yet. As long as there are multiple people battling it out underneath Donald Trump is going to do well. And this is not a debate that did much to eliminate a ton of people. Now, they all, if they qualify, get to do it again in September. But this is not going to do much to change the trajectory of a race where Donald Trump is so far ahead.
So Maggie, back to where we began. Did this debate and the way it played out and the infighting among the people on that stage tonight, did it validate Trump's decision not to show up at the debate? And do they think it validated it?
Yeah, I got a message from Chris LaCivita, one of Trump's top advisors, toward the end of the debate saying that his decision to skip it was validated within the first 30 minutes of the debate. People might disagree, but it's hard to argue that he made any kind of tactical error by not showing, at least as best as we can tell right now.
Because if he'd been there, there wouldn't be this muddling of things. There would just be Trump the piñata. And so ultimately, as perverse as many people might think it is to not participate in the democratic process of debating for the country and the party, strategically speaking, Trump feels like it was the right call.
Right. They're trying to win an election. They're not trying to win a debate.
Well, Maggie, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Have a good rest of your morning.
And you.
We'll be right back. Here's what else you need to know today. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the mercenary group that staged a brief rebellion against Russia's military leadership this summer, was listed as a passenger on a plane that crashed on Wednesday, killing all 10 people aboard. Little information is known about the cause of the crash or whether Prigozhin was in fact on the plane, but it immediately raised the question of whether Putin or his allies had sought to take out Prigozhin, who posed the greatest threat to Putin's leadership in decades. And
the altitude is being brought down from 800 meters, and we are nearing and approaching the lunar surface.
On Wednesday, India successfully landed a set of spacecrafts in the southern polar region of the moon, making it the first country to ever reach that part of the moon's surface in one piece. The landing touched off jubilant celebrations at mission control and across India.
People are applauding.
The polar regions of the moon have long interested researchers because it is believed that craters there contain frozen waters, which, in theory, could eventually be used by visiting astronauts. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Quester, Carlos Prieto, and Mary Wilson, with help from Summer Tamad and Rob Zipko. It was edited by Paige Cowan, contains original music by Marian Lozano, and was engineered by Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Grunberg and Ben Landberg of Wonderly. That's it for the Daily. I'm Mike Malboro. See you tomorrow.
George Conway, regardless of what Republicans thought last night in Milwaukee, Donald Trump most likely is going to be facing justice and facing justice again today. What do you expect as you look forward to the events of today in Georgia?
Well, I mean, I look forward to the mugshot. I look forward to the spectacle, I guess. I mean, it's kind of sad. It's almost old hat now. What's really sad was the events of last night, which will be soon forgotten, where you had 6 candidates saying they would vote for a person who's a convicted felon. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. But this is going to be 2016. This year is it's going to be 2016 is all over again because they're all attacking everyone but Trump, and they're going to end up nominating a candidate who will maybe a convicted felon, will probably die in prison, and Frank was found by a federal district court to be a rapist. It's just crazy. Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what the box you get out of this box. It's crazy.
I mean, look at this. Look at this. First of all, I want to get back to you and talk about how hard it's going to be for him to get out of this box, because I can't figure that out. But look at these people indicted in the Georgia election probe, all for blindly following a guy about stealing an election. Talk about, I mean, you're a lawyer. I mean, you've seen how much one charge against somebody can impact from life, especially from the feds. The feds usually don't miss. When they go after you, the feds get you. If they prosecute you, they convict you most of the time. Talk about what the future looks like for most of these people, and then let's talk about Donald Trump with 90-something indictments against him. And let's just talk for a second. How does he not end up in jail? Again, I've spent years saying he will always escape justice. He always escapes justice. No man is above the law but Donald Trump, it seems. But here, I go through every scenario. I don't see how he stays out of jail.
No, I agree with that. I mean, essentially, he has been playing Russian roulette with the law and has loaded every single chamber. I mean, one of those, he's not going to make it through all of this. The only way he can make it through all of this is if somehow he wins the presidency and then can declare himself immune from going to jail or being prosecuted. And I don't think that's going to happen. And he is, as for all the other defendants, I mean, I don't think there will be 18 defendants by the time this case goes to trial. I mean, I think you're already seeing them in conflict. You're already seeing different strategies playing out, and you're seeing that some of these defendants, even Rudy Giuliani, who came down to a private plane, he can't find a lawyer, and he can't pay one. He's going to have to sell his co-op in New York. And these people, all of these people, like a lot of them are going to end up having to plead. Jenna Ellis, no one's paying her legal fees. It's going to be Trump ending up all by himself or just a couple of other people. And I don't see how he survives that. But that's, the Georgia case is going to take the longest probably to resolve because it is a multi-defendant case. The Jack Smith has brought this absolute laser beam of a case in D.C. It's not complicated. It's just looking at his conduct. That case, I'm not going to be surprised if that case doesn't go to trial within a year and he's convicted. I don't see how he gets out of that. And the Mar-a-Lago documents case, the only thing he has going for him there is that the judge is this judge who actually ruled in his favor a few times but got slammed for it. But I don't know how she can save him other than by delaying the trial, and she hasn't really shown an inclination to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got these individuals who are going to testify that he moved the boxes around. You've got tapes showing he moved the boxes around. You've got this IT guy who just flipped, who basically says that he was told that the boss wanted to cover this up, and he's dead to rights there. And again, 91 counts. The prosecutors don't have to go 91 for 91. A lot of these felonies are 5, 10, 20 years. It's just all it takes is like a few counts, and he's done for the rest of his life.
So, very interesting. You brought up Tim Scott. I had actually forgotten about Tim for a second. I've been talking at least about how good he seems to be on the campaign trail. Good on the stump, good talking to people. He was not good last night. And so I guess the story, it's a South Carolina story. Tim Scott really underperformed last night, and Nikki Haley really overperformed to expectations. So that's a real surprise. I do have to say though, Mika, I'm so glad that the Rev talked about how the Republican Party has forfeited forever the idea that they were ever some law and order party or ever supported justice or, even the Constitution when Chris Christie's getting booed when he brings up the unpleasant fact that Donald Trump said he wanted to terminate the Constitution of the United States if that's what it took for him to get back into the White House. But those candidates raised their hands, except for Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie, to say they would support a president if he was convicted of stealing nuclear secrets, stealing military war plans to invade Iran, stealing military assessments on what the weakest parts of the United States military was, stealing a presidential election, and having everybody, not liberals, not progressives, having everybody around him saying, not only did he try to steal a presidential election, he headed up a conspiracy to get fake electors, and then called the Georgia Secretary of State saying, I need you to steal 11,000 something votes from me. So again, the fact that they would raise their hand and say that they would support a presidential candidate who's convicted of stealing nuclear secrets tells you, once again, so much more than you need to know about how low the Republican Party has fallen in 2023. It's sad and it's pathetic. And I, for one, think we need a strong Republican Party. This is not it.
And I guess the question that has to be asked is, it was an interesting night. It was a revealing night, as Mika said. We learned a lot about some of these people and their views, particularly raising their hand. Most of them, Ron DeSantis had been checking with everyone else to see if they were raising their hands to say, yes, I would support this man, even if he's a convicted felon. The larger question, as Donald Trump reports to Fulton County later tonight, is, does any of what we saw last night matter? Yes, Governor Haley had a good night. Yes, Vivek Ramaswamy introduced himself to the country. All of that may be true, but they're all down by 30 points. They're all down by 40 points according to the latest Yahoo News YouGov poll. Did anything that happened last night matter? Did anything change the race?
Yeah, that was my question going into this debate. Sort of, what is the point of this Republican primary? Because if the leading candidates are just auditioning to be Trump's top surrogate when it comes to defending him on the things that he's most vulnerable on, like his 4 arrests, the fact that he's getting a mugshot today, if Ron DeSantis is not willing to not even talk about the subject, but defend Trump on this subject, then why are you running against him? I mean, what is the point? A Republican primary is meant to challenge and vet candidates, right? And if you want to talk about electability, Nikki Haley sort of got there. She said, Donald Trump is disliked. How about the fact that President Biden and Democrats are almost certain to make this a focus of their campaigns? These criminal charges, as this goes to the courts, is almost certain going to dominate the news in our lives for the next 2 years. If you can't get to the point about saying we really have to grapple with the fact about how we prosecute alleged criminal conduct from a former president, and that matters for rule of law, I would be there for that debate. I would like to have it, but I understand why Ron DeSantis can't do it. Why can't you just say he's not going to be available to campaign against Joe Biden because he's going to be in court? Right? Like, you can make an electability argument in that way, but they're not interested in doing that. And so I see this, it might be the beginning of a coronation, not a real challenge.
Amanda, I mean, I get tired saying this, but, we Republicans, and I can talk about you and me here, we Republicans used to care about winning elections. In fact, I don't know, you could accuse some of us of caring maybe a little too much about winning elections. So you bring these things up, and there will be people out in Trump land going, oh, left-wing traitor, left-wing subversive, left-wing this, left-wing. We're talking about deficits. We're talking about debt. We're talking about the Constitution. We're talking about the things that Reagan talked about, protecting freedom in Western Europe, protecting freedom in Central Europe, protecting freedom in Eastern Europe. We're talking about these basic issues that Trumpers don't believe in. And then on top of that, we're talking about how to win. Like what you just said, there's nothing wild about that or radical about that. If you want to win the election, if you want to beat Joe Biden, put Nikki Haley up. She'll beat Joe Biden. Put Ron DeSantis up. Ron DeSantis will probably beat Joe Biden. Put Tim Scott up. Tim Scott will put... Look, we're in a position now where they can put just about anybody up against Joe Biden. And for whatever reason, I can't really explain it. I do think Biden's done very well in many areas. But Republicans would win. And yet, I will just say it, the idiots that were booing people saying that we had to adhere to the Constitution of the United States, they don't care about winning elections anymore. They only care about, like, they think they own the libs. That's kind of like the White House guy, I thank God I forgot his name, that bought the sushi, had somebody say something horrible about him, and he threw the sushi away thinking he was owning the libs. All he did was pay $100 for sushi and throw it away. Like, they're shooting themselves in the foot politically time and again. Like, forgive me for going on and on, but my God, what you said was so basic. And yet this Trump Republican Party, they don't listen because they're too interested in making a point instead of winning elections and changing America.
It's great to see you. Want to ask you a lot about last night. I'm sort of looking at the big picture, though, first, because we have Donald Trump putting out a statement saying he won the debate. I didn't see him on the stage. I guess he was doing an interview elsewhere. And then we have his co-defendants, mugshots, where they're smiling, where Rudy Giuliani, it seems to be making fun of the situation. Donald Trump wants to make his surrender in Fulton County kind of a primetime event. I mean, they appear to think this is funny. Can you list the ways in which this is all so very not funny?
Well, they can make as much fun of all this stuff as they want now, but having spent 7 years as the U.S. attorney in New Jersey, Mika, it's all fun and games until the jury's in the box. And then it becomes a different, much different thing. And, look, Donald Trump, what would you expect? You've known him for a long time. Of course, he's going to put out a statement that says he won the debate last night. But in the end of it, he wasn't there because he's a coward, because he can't come and defend either his failed record as president or his personal conduct, which has so disgraced what's gone on in our country over the last number of years. And so, you know, I wouldn't expect anything different from him. I don't. I have the Truth Social app on my phone, and I'm a better man for it.
Okay. And how do you think that you did in the debate last night? And what did you think of the field without Trump in it?
Well, look, I felt good about how we did last night. You know, I wanted to make sure that everybody, both in that arena and much more importantly, all of the people watching at home understand that I'm going to stand up and tell the truth about where our country needs to go and about how Donald Trump has failed us and would fail our party if he were ever made the nominee again. But also talked about important issues. You know, I guess Wes must have turned in early last night. Didn't hear me talking about education. I was talking about that last night on the stage, talking about my trip to Ukraine and how important it was for us to stand against Vladimir Putin. And when Vivek Ramaswamy was just, you know, getting too out of hand, the moderators wouldn't try to control him, so I did.
Governor Christie, good morning. You told some truth last night that in the parallel universe shouldn't be that difficult to tell, but you and Asa Hutchinson seem to be the only one able to do it, which is that Donald Trump's conduct around January 6th, around the 2020 election, whatever you think about these prosecutions of him now, was wrong, was unforgivable. You also did not raise your hand in this moment, you and Asa Hutchinson, when the candidates were asked, would you still support Donald Trump as the candidate if he were convicted? You could see some of them, including Governor DeSantis, look down the aisle to see if everyone else is raising their hand, and then he joined in. Why is it, not for you, but why is it so difficult for these other candidates to tell those very basic truths, not even talking about policy, but basic truths that you told about the Constitution last night?
I can only assume it's because they're auditioning for what they pray will be a future vice presidential nomination or cabinet bid in a Trump administration. The problem for them is going to be Donald Trump's never going to be president of the United States again. And it becomes more and more clear to me every day that folks around this country, especially independents and disaffected Republicans, are not going to rejoin the Trump coalition based upon his conduct over the last, 3 years since he left the presidency. And so I think these are all political strategic decisions that these folks are making. And it's got to matter whether someone says they're willing to suspend the Constitution that they took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend. That's just wrong. It's not a hard answer for me. And it's not a hard answer for them either. But they're playing a political game.
Governor Christie, you were one of few candidates on stage who you voiced for robust support for Ukraine, and you mentioned your recent trip there. That's a real divide within the Republican primary electorate. And how do you intend to make the case that continued United States support to Ukraine is in the national interest?
Well, Vladimir Putin helped me again yesterday to make that case with the murder of Prigozhin. Now, he's an awful person too, but we don't settle political scores through murder unless, of course, you're Vladimir Putin. And this is the guy who Donald Trump calls brilliant and a genius. Sorry, I disagree. And I do believe that we need to stand up for Ukraine and that fight right now is a proxy war between the United States and China, and that it is the right thing to do to protect freedom-loving people who are being tortured and killed by a barbaric Russian army, and it is the right thing to do to allow the Ukrainians to be armed to fight this fight and send a very clear message to Vladimir Putin, but even more importantly, to President Xi in China, that the United States will not come to run from its friends.
Governor Christie, I have 3 quick questions for you. I'll give them to you all at once because you have amazing retentive powers, that I know. The first question is, Do you believe that Joseph R. Biden was legitimately elected president of the United States in the fall of 2020? Second question is, do you believe, as a former U.S. attorney, that any of the candidates on that stage last night who said that they would continue to support and vote for a convicted felon, potentially, as president of the United States, what's your reaction to that? And third, your reaction to how annoying were you and was Vivek Ramaswamy on that stage last night?
All right, so as question number one, of course, Joe Biden was and is the legitimately elected president of the United States from the 2020 campaign. That's an easy one to answer. It's so easy that even Ron DeSantis can answer it now, so that means it's really easy. As to the second question, it makes me laugh when you have folks up there who say that they're for law and order, and we heard that a number of times last night. But you can't be for law and order for some people and not for everybody. And so that means the law applies to everyone. I heard Mike Pence say last night, I wish that he wouldn't have been charged, but no one's above the law. Well, which one is it? And so I get confused by folks. The only thing that offends me more than folks who turn their back on law and order as it applies to Donald Trump for political purposes are those who try to have it both ways for political purposes. And thirdly, I think I said it pretty clearly in the clip you showed that by about 15 minutes in, I had already had enough of being told that for somebody who, like me, sacrificed 7 years of my life being a United States attorney for New Jersey, then another 8 years being governor of New Jersey, that I am bought and paid for by anybody, especially by a candidate like Vivek, who, in his book that came out last year, said Donald Trump's conduct on January 6th was reprehensible, plain and simple. Now he says, I didn't say that. No, I'm not saying you said it. You wrote it. Or whoever wrote your book for you wrote it. And secondly, he now says that he's the guy who will pardon Donald Trump and wants everyone else to commit to it. And I actually thought Mike Pence's answer on that was pretty good, where he said, I have used the pardon power. And so have I as governor of New Jersey. And it should be used with mercy and reason. And there's no reason to show mercy on Donald Trump when he doesn't even want to admit that anything he did was wrong.
Yeah, you're right. Vivek Ramaswamy proposed a preemptive pardon on all of this that we're watching for Donald Trump. So, Governor, let me ask you, a lot of people think you had a good night last night. They still look at the polls and they go, well, this is Trump's race to lose. He's not going to lose it. He's up by 40 points and on and on. There was a poll out yesterday in New Hampshire that has you up now in double digits, in second place behind Donald Trump in the state of New Hampshire. What changes the dynamic of a race that a lot of people, frankly, have written off and say this is an inevitability? It's a fait accompli. Donald Trump's the nominee. Sure, he might lose the general election, but he's going to be the nominee of the party. Why do you think that's wrong? And if you do think it's wrong, which I assume you do, what changes here? What changes this dynamic that with each new prosecution, each new indictment, each new appearance in court, Trump's numbers seem to go up among primary voters?
Look, the first thing is I make a gentle suggestion to all of you in the news media from someone who's been a practitioner in this business now for over 20 years. National polls in presidential races during the primary mean nothing. We don't have a national primary. And if you don't think those national polls will change on caucus day in Iowa, you have never watched this process. If you don't believe they'll change again after first in the nation primary day in New Hampshire, you've never watched or appreciated this process. So what will change this is a campaign. Last night was the starting gun for the campaign. And I think this coming week, leading into Labor Day weekend, most normal Americans will say, leave me alone. I'm enjoying the last week of summer with my family, and I don't need to hear from you people. And so we should keep quiet for most of this week. And then after Labor Day, it's going to get going. And, Willie, I look at the New Hampshire poll you just referenced. I have not been in this race 3 months. And I've gone from 0 to 14 in New Hampshire. I I am past Ron DeSantis by 5 points. I am past Vivek by 3 points. And I'm now within 20 of Donald Trump. Okay, 20 ain't gonna win you anything but, nice parting gifts. But it's August. So when people are asked polls nationally that say if the election were held today, their answer should be, I'd be shocked, because it's not going to be held today. So I would not worry about the national polls. Look at these state-by-state polls in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, and in Nevada, because the race will change markedly when each one of those states weigh in, and then we'll see where we stand. So I'm not the least bit discouraged. In fact, after not even 3 months in this race, I'm incredibly encouraged. And last night, I was happy to get on that stage, look into the camera, and tell the people the truth about our democracy, the truth about Donald Trump, and the truth, in my view, about Joe Biden, and the fact that neither one of them are up to it. People say the country's so divided. There's one thing they're united on. 75% of the people in this country say they don't want the race to be Trump versus Biden. And so I think we should keep that in mind when we're evaluating all these polls.
Let's talk about what we saw last night. We've been talking this morning about that debate, 8 people on the stage minus Donald Trump. What did you make of what you heard?
I mean, it made me realize how thankful I am to have Joe Biden as a partner inside this work. I mean, there were 8 people on stage and one worldview. And the singular worldview was divisive. The singular worldview was there's a specific playbook that they were all playing to, but there's no plan. And and I think about it where we watched 8 people on the stage talk about things like national abortion bans. We watched 8 people on stage talk about how much they would want to cut Medicaid and Social Security. We watched 8 people obviously say that law and order doesn't matter because convictions to them wouldn't matter. So, and the thing that was really, I think, really alarming for me is, I'm going around the state of Maryland all the time. And I don't care what part of the state of Maryland I'm going to, in Democratic areas or traditionally historically voting Republican areas. What they were saying was not speaking to them. And I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing the conversations about national abortion. I'm not hearing conversations about, is climate change a hoax? When 70% of my state is waterline or waterlogged areas. And we see the impacts of this every single day. So they just weren't speaking to the people of my state. Or frankly, I'm not sure who they're actually speaking to us.
I guess the question to you that we've been asking Republicans and conservatives this morning is, did anything they saw last night matter? In other words, if you've got a guy in Donald Trump who's up by 40 points, 30 points, pick your poll. Did that matter last night? Or was it just instructive to understand the worldview of the party at this point?
Yeah, I mean, well, especially when you watch people stand up and line up and say that, regardless of the fact that we now have a president who's going to be on trial for things like trying to overthrow democracy, a person's on trial for things like stealing nuclear codes. And I tell you, as a combat vet myself, the idea that you would sacrifice safety of people who wear the uniform of this country, and you're on trial for that, and regardless of what a jury or a judge says, I would still support them to lead. I think that was remarkably dangerous. And the thing that I think about why I'm excited and enthusiastic to continue to support the Biden administration is the work that's happening right now. We see it every day, and it matters. Right? I can tell you in the state of Maryland, the work that we've already done, the partnerships that we've done, the fact that we're putting $267 million into broadband expansion in the end of my first term, I want the entire state covered with affordable and accessible broadband. And that's the Democratic partners. The fact that we have now put the state of Maryland has received $3.5 billion from the infrastructure, bipartisan infrastructure, which is going to fix roads and bridges and tunnels. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel in Baltimore over 40,000 jobs. That's real stuff. It's not performative talking points. That's real economic impacts that change the trajectory of families. So I don't think much changed last night because I think people are seeing on the ground the fact that we have an administration. Frankly, as a governor, I have a partner who's actually making things happen.
Governor, one of the things that perhaps struck more than a few people is the lack of emphasis or discussion last night about something that in your travels around Maryland might bear us out that's at the core of family life, average American families. The grammar school and high school education of their children. There was no discussion of that last night. And it seems somewhat that most of the Republican Party is really interested in public schools, public school libraries, about restricting books and banning books. But in your travels around your state, what do you hear about the need to improve public education?
I'm hearing that we need a public school education system that's training our children how to read and do math. I'm hearing that we need an education system that is going to teach our students how not just to be employees, but how to be employers and to actually drive economic growth. I'm hearing that we want an education system that's starting earlier because we know that 80% of brain development happens in a child by the time that child is 5 years old. So why do we have children start at 5 makes no sense. I'm hearing that we have an education system, we need an education system that's going to invest in career technical education. Because while I'm proud of the fact that in the state of Maryland, we have some of the best four-year institutions in the country, we are also going to end this myth that every single one of our students have to attend one in order to be economically successful. But the thing that we're seeing is that the investments that have been made within our state, the investments that are made in partnership with what we're seeing from the Biden administration, that's actually hitting people where they are. That's actually making sure that we can have a high-quality public school education system that is going to prepare our students for not just the jobs of now, but also for the jobs of the future. And the distraction, the shiny object of focusing on things like book bans and telling people that books like Beloved and Between the World and Me should somehow be banned from children's educational roster. It's not only a distraction. It's not only offensive, but what it's also doing is getting us away from the core elements of public school educational supports that the Biden administration is pushing, that us at the state levels have been making sure they're being reinforced in our states, and really making sure that we're focusing on creating a long-term sustainable and competitive economy that everyone can benefit from and not just some.
Governor Moore, nice to say that. This campaign pitch from the Biden-Harris team is pretty similar to 2020 in that they're stressing this is extreme MAGA, and to save democracy, you've got to keep Joe Biden in office. Does that pitch work a second go-around?
I think about this idea of democracy deeply. I heard last night repeatedly from a few of the people on stage this term patriotism and why patriotism matters. And the thing is, I agree, but not that brand. Because patriotism actually means sustaining democracy and fighting for basic values that everyone in the country should hold true. You cannot claim that you love the country when you hate half of the people in it. You can't claim that you love the country when the policies that you're putting together are intentionally divisive and intentionally keeping people excluded from seeing how they are actually involved and engaged in this. And so I think the strategy that we've continued to see and why the danger of the extreme MAGA movement, it's not just that this is an ideology that is starting to and continuing to erode at the basic fabric of democracy, the basic fabric of freedoms, that I think for all of us not only we hold true, but we will fight for and defend. It's also not getting at the core challenges that people are actually facing, because it allows us to get caught up in distractions. Right. So instead of focusing on things like how do we make sure that we have sustained job growth, I can tell you right now, we're watching historic levels of historically low levels of unemployment. In the state of Maryland, we're going 5 straight months of historically low unemployment. The fact that we're talking about inflation, we have now seen inflation that's now at its lowest level since 2021. And where the United States has the lowest inflation rate of any of the G7 countries. We want to talk about infrastructure and building. We're now having core assets, billions of dollars that are being put towards roads and bridges. That's both getting people to work in terms of fixing it, and also giving people the opportunity to get to work. Because you can't have economic mobility if you don't have physical mobility. So what's happening is you're watching a campaign in a re-elect that's saying the momentum that we're seeing in the partnership that we are seeing with our federal government, it matters. And that's the thing that we want to make sure we have for years on.
Joe, we had people on the stage last night, minus Donald Trump, who was apparently watching, given the fact he was up until the wee hours of the night tweeting, or whatever it is, True Social and his support for Vivek Ramaswamy after having watched that. So many extraordinary moments we've been talking about already this morning, but particularly the one where the candidates were asked, if Donald Trump is convicted of the crimes which he's accused here, would you still support him? Would you still vote for him? Some of them raised their hands quickly. Others, including Ron DeSantis, kind of looked down the line to see what the temperature was, then raised his hand. Only Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson down at the end of the road did not raise their hand. In other words, excusing the actions and the alleged crimes of Donald Trump.
Well, that was a defining moment when you had most of the Republicans up on the stage, 6 of the 8 Republicans up on the stage, saying that they would support a presidential candidate found guilty by a jury of his peers of stealing American nuclear secrets. Let's just say that again. 6 out of 8 Republican candidates said they would support a politician that was convicted by a jury of his own peers of stealing American nuclear secrets. I think that probably says all you need to know about the Republican Party, about the Republican base that booed Chris Christie when he talked about Donald Trump saying that he would terminate the Constitution of the United States. It was crazy. There were other side issues here. Vivek insulting everybody. Accusing the janitor of being on the take, accusing anybody that got in front of him of somehow being owned by special interests. The cameraman, I'm sure he afterwards accused him of being owned by, he accused everybody, which again, the people that are doing that, it's just such a con. I had somebody that was in the room last night. I asked how everybody did and talked about Vivek. He said, he's going to go up in the polls after this, no doubt. He, of course, was had canned answers, was a con man, but they're going to love him for what he did. It's kind of crazy. I thought Nikki Haley did well. I thought, though, on Vivek, it was funny. He attacked other people for having memorized lines, and Chris Christie nailed it. He sounded like the ChatGPT candidate because everything was pre-programmed. Everything was canned. Every response was like, if you had said, what would a candidate running, in the Republican nomination for president say to this question? And it's, again, everything perfectly canned. I will say Ron DeSantis flat. I don't think he hurt himself, but didn't help himself either. He just doesn't have the game. He's just, it's like the Rev said, the Rev knows, we don't, but the Rev says when you get on this level, it's like nothing you've ever been at before. Nothing prepares you for it. None of us can imagine what it's like unless we actually have been out there. And, Ron DeSantis is not, it doesn't look like he's ready to take on the heavyweight champ. George Conway.
From the New York Times, I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily.
Welcome to the New York Times podcast, your I do not even know how to get to Shakedown Street of music news and criticism. I'm your host, John Caramonica. As Taylor Swift once famously said, where were you on the night of July 16th? Maybe where you were was at the final show of The Dead. Longtime listeners of podcasts will well understand that this is perhaps a blind spot for me. The popularity of the long-standing fervor around The Dead and the Grateful Dead and all the spin-off bands, Further, etc. But you know what? It's time for me to grow up. It's time for me to step into my adulthood and learn something. And so, given that The Dead has completed their final tour, not necessarily final performance, but final tour with its current lineup, I thought this is a perfect moment to reflect and get someone in here who can help guide me through what's been going on, especially on this last tour, but also the last few years, to talk about this Space Jam subject matter this week. 2 segments, 2 guests. First, Scott Bernstein's going to be here. Scott's the editorial director of Jambase, a fervent chronicler of this universe for years and years and years. Going to talk about some of the big picture issues at play in The Dead and The Dead & Co. and all of the many, many tributary offshoots from that universe. And then later, Mark Tracy is going to show up. Mark wrote about the final Dead & Co. shows, final, unquote, Mark's Dead & Co. shows for the Times. And we're going to talk to Mark about the relationship between Dead and Fish and also the appeal of the universe of the Dead across generational lines. But first, Scott Bernstein is here. Scott's been going to these shows based on his writing for a long-ass time. First of all, welcome to Popcast.
Thank you for having me, John. Glad to be here.
I'm psyched you're here. Also, you are currently, by the time this airs, this will have happened already, but you are in Boston for Jambase's 25th anniversary, right? What's the vibe? What's going on for these events?
That's correct. We're really excited. We're to celebrate 25 years of our site, which is the destination for live music. We have articles about all that's going on in live music and listings of concerts all around the country and internationally. And so this weekend, we're celebrating 25 years. We've got BT ALC Big Band, which is a jazz meets big band ensemble, which is playing in Somerville at Sally O'Brien's. And then we move to Boston Harbor Distillery, where we've got Club to Elf, a incredible Boston-based band. Also on the bit of the jazz, improvisational tip, and Jennifer Hartswick and Nick Casarino opening for them on Friday. Before we move down the South Shore to Soundcheck Studios for 2 nights. First, we have the Jennifer Hartswick Band. Jenny's a member of the Trey Anastasio Band. Trey is the guitarist and leader of Fish, and she's been in this band for over 20 years. We also play on Sunday. We've got Humphreys McGee, a huge band in the improvisational jam scene that's got a sold-out show. So we're really excited for all of it, and also have a great pianist, Holly Bowling, who will be opening the action on Saturday.
At the beginning of the episode, we were listening to Althea from the Final Dead show, which was on July 16th. We'll get into some of the specifics of that show and that band in a minute, but I think I want to open with a little bit more of a philosophical question, especially given you just named a litany of artists, multiple generations playing this festival that you guys are throwing, or this set of shows for your celebration. Can you trace them all to a common antecedent? And is that antecedent, is it the original Grateful Dead? Is it Fitch? Like, where's the kind of, if you're family treeing everything back, where is the point where all of those family trees hit the same root?
I think it's the Grateful Dead improvised in concert while playing rock music. And that's really, they were one of the first huge bands to do that. So a lot of the Humphreys McGee's, the Holly Bowlings come from that. And Phish and Grateful Dead have been compared since the beginning of Phish. And it's only in that they play different songs each night and they improvise live. Their music is so different from each other that it was unfair that Phish had to deal with the Dead comparison for so long. And Phish did everything they could until they became big enough that they didn't have to worry about the Grateful Dead comparison. But I do think that a number of the bands that are playing this event this weekend do trace back to the Grateful Dead and more directly Phish because they're the generation after Phish.
This may be, again, you're going to get a lot of dumb questions from me today, so forgive me. But hopefully they'll lead to productive conversation. In the same way that these bands trace back to the original Grateful Dead and a particular approach to playing music and also the style of music played in that particular way, the relationship between the Grateful Dead and the Dead currently, can you talk a little bit about the ways in which the most recent iteration of the Dead, quote, both was reverent to, but also innovated past what was happening with the original band?
It's important to know that when Jerry Garcia passed away on August 9th, 1995, the members of the Grateful Dead decided to retire the name the Grateful Dead. And they did move forward afterwards in various configurations, originally using the name The Other Ones, and then moved on to The Dead and leaving the Grateful part behind. And then in 2015, it was the 50th anniversary of the first Grateful Dead show. And at that point, the 4 core members of the band who were surviving, Bob Weir, Mickey Hart, Bill Kreutzmann, and Phil Lesh, got together and played a series of shows at stadiums in the Bay Area and in Chicago under the name Fare Thee Well, celebrating 50 years of Grateful Dead. And for those shows, which were huge in our scene and all sold out tickets through the roof, the 4 core members of the Grateful Dead made it clear it would be the last time they would be performing together. That was for the 4th. 3 of the members, everyone but bassist Phil Lesh, went on and formed a band with John Mayer, a couple of other guys, called Dead & Company, that started in October of 2015. And that is the band that has carried the flag, played arenas and stadiums for the past 8 years before embarking on the final tour this summer and ending on July 16th, AT&T Park in San Francisco.
As a musical proposition, do you feel that people have gravitated towards this version of the band, the Dead & Co. version of the band, to scratch an old itch, or is it something fundamentally new?
I think it's a mix. I've been very surprised to see how many young people have been attending these Dead & Company shows. And I think certainly they appreciate the lineage and the vibe and scene. You joked about Shakedown Street, and Shakedown Street is the name of a Grateful Dead song. That was the title track of their 1978 studio album. And it became the name of the parking lot scene at Grateful Dead shows, where community and sales of all different types of things. So I think for the young people, a lot of that is wanting to experience Shakedown Street as well as the music. And as far as the music, I think it's carried forward where the Dead were at in 1995, with obviously John Mayer adding a new twist to it, but they're playing pretty much the same repertoire that they did in 1995, along with some older stuff that got lost along the way of the Dead's 30-year career, Grateful Dead's 30-year career.
Can you talk me through what you felt this tour achieved musically? obviously, it achieves a lot historically, and spiritually, and also financially. Very good at business, these folks. Very, very good at business. But can you talk a little bit about what this tour achieved musically?
There was a big change for this final tour, and that was that Grateful Dead original co-founding drummer Bill Kreutzmann stepped away from the band pretty shortly before they started the tour. And in its place, they brought in Jay Lane, who had played with Primus and was also a member of Bob Weir's various side bands for over 20 years. And he brought a new energy and vitality to the music that I really feel like they hit a new stride this summer in a big way. One of the big criticisms of Dead & Company was the tempo. Slow and Company was a phrase that was bandied about.
Damn, sick bird. Sick bird.
Yes. And that went away. Jay brought a good energy to it, and they went to new places. They mashed up this song Dark Star and a Big River by Johnny Cash in a way they never had before. It's sad that it ended because they really, after 8 years, hit their stride in such a big way this past summer.
So let's listen to a little bit of that. This is Fenway Park, June 24th. Dark Star, Dead & Company. As a sort of casual, distant observer of this ecosystem for a long time, and also one who professionally writes about bands who say they break up and then they reconstitute, they go away for 6 months, they refeed. There's no such thing as retirement. I have a built-in inherent skepticism about bands that say that they are breaking up, that they're never going to perform again. I've been at enough farewell shows of artists who say this is the last one, and then some period of time later come back. Within this world, is there, how can I say, internalized skepticism, head scratching about the truth of the retirement or the truth of the end of this era? Is it more of an understanding that everything mutates and changes and there will continue to be music made by these folks, just potentially in a different configuration? How is that thought of internally?
I think in both of those things. Yes, the music will continue by the members of the band in various formations. Bob Weir has a band, Bob Weir and Wolf Bros, that they have been playing for 4 or 5 years and already have a tour planned for this fall. So he's definitely a road dog and going to continue to make music. Also, certainly there was skepticism when it was announced as the final tour, but as it went on and as there were so many magical moments over this past summer, it was clear that the band members themselves were starting to reconsider the move to have it be the last tour. Mickey Hart gave an interview where he said it's going to be the last tour, but it doesn't mean we won't play together. We never said we'd stop playing together. John Mayer, the day after the tour, put an Instagram post talking about how magical the summer was and saying that this band will play together again. What the future holds is not clear at this point, but there will be a future for this band. And I think coming into the summer, they were more sure of it being the final tour than they are right now.
Can you talk me through, again, forgive me, as a novice, what do you feel each individual member of the band is excelling at in this most recent iteration? What's the thing, if you were to point me and say, John, this is actually where I need you to focus on this, what are the things with the individuals that you think would really speak to someone who is coming to it relatively cold?
Bob Weir is the voice of Dead & Company when it comes to representing the original members of the Grateful Dead. And he is a rhythm guitar player with a style all his own, and such a unique and inventive style. And what's interesting with Dead & Company, and since Jerry's death, is he started singing a lot of songs that were written by Jerry, that Jerry sang throughout the whole Grateful Dead career. But Bobby really leaned into it, and as the years have gone on, his voice has become just stronger, and he's really brought a nice tone to these songs that really works well, especially ballads. So I think that's where he really stands out. And then as far as John Mayer, he has really impressed us as someone who didn't come from this world, who is more of a blues guy and a pop guy. He has the Jerry licks down while still infusing it with his own style. He isn't a Jerry clone. And he's also got a great voice and sings probably, I'd say, a quarter of the songs. The drummers, the Rhythm Devils, Bill Kreutzmann and Mickey Hart, they not only propelled the songs, and of course Bill left before the final tour, but a major part of the show was called Drum Space. And that was when the stage was just turned over to the Rhythm Devils. And they have this huge setup that they really kept it interesting, added elements of even EDM and samples to the mix. And then the instrumentalist would come on stage and would purely improvise, not based around the song at all, before the drummers would come back and the rest of the show would continue. Bassist Otil Burbridge came to Dead & Company from the Allman Brothers band. He was the Allman Brothers bassist for over 15 years, and he got the Dead & Company gig about a year after the Allmans broke up, and not only has a bass style all his own, and brings a groove, such a cool groove to these songs. He also sings occasionally and focuses on Jerry Garcia ballads with a beautiful, soulful voice. As I mentioned, Jay Lane came from the Primus world, but also was Bob's guy and added a vitality and strength and energy to these songs. And finally, there's the keyboardist, Jeff Clementi, who is the secret sauce to this band. He plays so many different instruments, whether it's a clavinet, a synthesizer, electric piano, acoustic piano, adding different tones and elements and colors to this music, and knows it so well. And one of the coolest parts of the Dead & Company experience for me was watching the chemistry he had with John Mayer. The two of them played off each other so well, and that's what I'm particularly going to miss about this band if they don't play together.
I'm interested, even just hearing you talk through everybody's, especially the newcomers, relatively speaking, into the universe, about the durability of the music, in that you can bring in someone like Mayer or Otil Burbridge, who come from different lineages, and on some level, they're there to be faithful to the source material, but they come with a different toolkit. And I wonder, when those new toolkits are applied, and the music, it has a new energy, it has a different texture to it, how is that generally received within the community? Is there a transition period of adoption, of we're not sure if this makes sense, and then over time people get acclimated to it? How does that work? Both, and I think those are probably two instructive cases. One with Otil Burbridge coming from the Allmans, which is a very different kind of band, but also with John Mayer coming from more of a pop sensibility, and also, frankly, being just a very well-known, famous person who is like sublimating himself to the cause of the music. How have those transition points been for both of them in terms of fan reception?
I think there was a lot of skepticism when the band was formed. with John coming from such a different world. And to be honest, I think there is still a number, there's a percentage of Grateful Dead fans that have never bought into Dead & Company. But there's a large number that did, and it took them time, and the band took time to warm up. They certainly didn't start from a heavy level, but worked up to it. John Mayer certainly put in the time. He learned a huge repertoire of songs and had them down. I mean, it was never warming up, needing time for him to warm up. But I think it took there were some fans that no matter what any member of the Grateful Dead is going to do, will be there, are just love the music so much that it doesn't matter what it sounds like. I hate to say it, but they'll be there no matter what. So there were certainly some of those people that were there for Dead & Company, but I think they also impressed a number of the skeptics over time. And the proof is in the pudding. They played stadiums. They sold out stadiums. The numbers of concert gross that they did was pretty mind-blowing, and up there with the end of the Grateful Dead.
Sometimes over the last 10 or 15 years, I found myself at shows of artists who don't have loads in common musically with the Grateful Dead or any of the spin-off bands, but there was something about the relationship of the crowd to the artist that, to me, felt like what I imagined the relationship of the crowd to artist in the Dead universe was like. I think there are some people who feel this way, frankly, about the Dave Matthews Band. Certainly there are people who feel that way about Phish. I remember having a very vivid sensation of that at a kind of one-off Bon Iver show, where I was like, he's going to be doing a version of this for 10 or 20 or 30 years. He's never going to have a pop hit in any sense, but he is going to cultivate this faithful who are experiencing themselves through what it's like to be in that shared space with him and whatever experimental or improvised thing that he's doing on stage when he's improvising or when the band is. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about the expanded ecosystem of artists who you think are taking little pieces of the Grateful Dead's approach to developing community. Because to me, that seems as valuable as the music itself. You can have incredible music, but if you can't convince people to come back, that's it. You're a niche, you're a novelty. Tell me a little bit about the community building and how you see that playing out elsewhere in music.
What's really been fascinating to me is how it's always been a thing for jam acts or rock improvisers to play different music every night and have audiences that are willing to take chances with them, that want to see them expand the song and hit new territories. But it's really come into other worlds, into indie worlds, into even Metallica. Metallica now doesn't play the same set list every night and has built a community of fans that are really interested to see how their shows are going to be different from night to night. Even Taylor Swift in her latest tour has the surprise songs elements, switches it up a little bit. And I think that's all grown from the Grateful Dead's playing different songs every night, never playing the same show 2 nights in a row, and having an audience that is excited for that wants to be in a community that travels from show to show and sees band that plays different things from night to night and keeps the set list and their song chasers. I mean, even I'm sure the Taylor Swift world, there are people that are still looking for a song that she hasn't played yet that will be in one of these surprise song segments. And it's really expanded well beyond just being in the jam world and the rock improvisation world to the indie world, where lots of other bands, and again, Metallica and Taylor Swift, not playing the same show from night to night.
I think of the Grateful Dead and that full ecosystem. I'm thinking people traveling, seeing a lot of shows. Obviously, that happens with a lot of acts. There's a lot of merch to buy. Has it on some level become a little bit of like a luxury proposition to be a committed follower of this world because of the amount of travel or other funds that have to be spent? Obviously, we're not in this